Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm your host, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac, and today I have Natalie Egan from the D&D team on, and we're going to be discussing the latest starter set, and more so the designs behind it, seeing as how it is the third introduction method into D&D 5th edition. But before we do that, we have a 5-star review entitled, "Whether you level up by XP or milestone, you'll level up here." And that is brought to us by Grey Jedi 505. I've been listening to this podcast for over 5 years now and have gotten tons of inspiration and guidance by the hosts, Chris, Mitch, Neal, and all of their guests. They have made me a better DM and also a better player. I wouldn't have had the courage or drive to DM or have my own D&D actual play podcast without them. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Grey Jedi, and if anything above what we do, you keep up the good work, and as always, keep on dungeon mastering. But with that out of the way, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
So today for the meat, we have another special guest, someone who has not been on the pod before, which is always exciting for me personally. And today we have Natalie Egan, the D&D team product manager. Natalie, thanks for coming on.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've been going back and forth on the email. If people knew how many emails get sent to schedule a podcast, they would be absolutely blown away. But we're excited to have you here, so we'll jump straight into the interview section. Is there a little bit that you can tell us about yourself that you think the listeners would be interested in, like your D&D story, origin story, or your origin story with D&D, like joining the team, anything like that?
Oh yeah. So I've been with Wizards for a little over 2 years now, but I actually learned how to play D&D right when 5th edition was starting. My friendly local game store was having a learn to play event. I had always been very D&D curious. I had my own separate board gaming group at the time, and one other member of that group was also D&D curious. So we went to the learn to play event, and it just blew my mind. From the first session, it was a feeling of where has this game been my entire life? I just latched onto it and haven't really looked back since. And then once I figured out that Wizards was located essentially in my backyard up in Seattle, I stalked their career page for a while until I found a role that I was like, oh, hey, I do that. So now I work for Wizards, and it's amazing.
Oh, that's awesome. Refresh. So how early, this is just a personal question. So how early into the D&D 5e was that? Was it still D&D Next at the time, or was it already 5th edition is out, come on down, here's how to play?
I think it was right as it was launching, because okay. I remember everyone being hyped about 5th edition, ooh, check out these rules, come learn to play. They were really trying to get folks that were coming off of 4th edition or just completely new to role playing. And yeah, I love my local game stores for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, in those early times of 5th edition, and I don't think I've told this story on the podcast, but I learned a valuable lesson that as the forever DM, it's not very fun to go with your party to something because they will all deem you as the leader. And that's not really what I was in for until we got there. And they're like, well, you're in charge. I'm like, oh no,
you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm like, oh no, that's not what I wanted. I just came here to turn my brain off, and I brought all my players who automatically looked at me and said, yes, you shall be the leader of this group. And
you've been dungeon mastering ever since.
Well, yeah, it was a valuable lesson I learned that day that if I want to go somewhere and only play, don't bring my players with me. But the other question I have is there anything that you're currently working on, and definitely we'll throw the caveat, that you can tell us about?
I can say a title of a book, and it's one line, amp saying. It is that, and it's coming out early next year. It is called Keys from the Golden Vault. It is an adventure anthology that has a heist at the center of every adventure. And I cannot wait for this book, and I wish I could say more. But get your rogues and your bards ready.
Oh, so good. I love the anthologies because of how I approach most books. I like reading most books and taking what I want. And those are just, which is super funny, I guess, for one that is centered around a heist, even more so that, go and steal the bits and pieces out of those anthologies and find places and spaces for them. I know some people try and look at them like always wholesale, like, oh, this didn't make the campaign that I wanted. I'm like, I don't know that they ever really designed them with that intent. It's there and those threads are there. But I really feel like those are just so good to just steal bits and pieces from.
Absolutely.
Well, okay. We'll keep an eye out for that. Okay. So this one will kind of tie back to the topic at hand. I cannot remember which of our patrons had sent it before, but the surprise question I have for you is, if you were a dragon, what would you hoard?
Oh man, that is a wonderful question. I would hoard houseplants.
Nice.
I have, one of my hobbies outside of work. I have, last time I counted, it was like 75 houseplants.
Yeah.
I have a lot, like basically my entire living room. Any place where there's a window, it's just filled with plants.
Yep, you're preaching to the choir. I tend to go for succulents personally, just because I don't have the greenest of thumbs. Okay. Again, you're bringing out things that I have not said a lot on this podcast. The most interesting thing that we have in our house that we've somehow managed to keep alive for a very extended period of time is we've had the same Venus flytrap for 2.5 years now.
Okay. Those are actually kind of picky plants. So that is really great that you can keep one alive.
Yeah. So it was starting to die. And what I had realized is that because you use moss basically as kind of the soil, a different kind of moss had grown on the top and was slowly choking it out. It just, like, at first it seemed really cool because it's like, oh, there's this moss on here. And then you're just like, oh no, wait, this is very bad. And
this moss is bad.
Yeah. And so then I repotted it and now it's starting to come back. Also, just fun fact, and I'm throwing these facts out because the real world is rife for things for D&D because it is weirder usually than D&D.
Absolutely.
Did you know the Venus flytrap is a flowering plant?
I did not know that.
Neither did I until this giant stalk shot up and there was like this avocado looking thing at the top. And I said, I don't know what that is. And I don't know how I don't know how I personally feel about it. This thing already eats a lot of flies and it was a flower. And it basically said, if you let it go, the whole plant becomes lethargic for about a year, because it spends so much energy propagating.
Interesting.
Yes.
Like I can do nothing else but flower this one beautiful flower.
Yeah.
Until I wither away.
Yes. And the second time I actually let it flower just to have the kids experience like what that would look like. And it was surprisingly pretty for being so terrifying and killing a lot of flies.
Nice. I think the majority of my collection is Hoyas. Okay. They're kind of fun, kind of picky also. Like they don't know if they want a lot of water or no water at all. So I've come to find that most of my plants thrive off of neglect.
Nice. That's the way to go.
Stop paying attention to them and they will tell me when they need water.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to dive in and talk about the latest, and even saying that starts a really interesting conversation, the latest starter set, which in a lot of ways is the latest iteration of, the designed window or door into playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Like I said, it's a really interesting topic, and I think it's really beneficial to our listeners to start to think about, okay, now that 5th edition has been out this long, why are these the design choices that, the company that's producing it, making it, to say, hey, this is how we think now that players should enter into 5th edition. Because in a lot of ways, I feel like the very first starter set was really good about people that had already played Dungeons and Dragons, but showing you now how to play 5th edition. Then when the Essentials kit came out, it was really like, hey, if you don't know anything, or you've got a group of people that maybe played D&D 20, 30 years ago, and they're trying to jump back in, here's a lot of tools to facilitate you jumping in. And I feel like with this one, it's like, you don't need to know anything about anything, but come on down here, check this out. So yeah, I think we'll kind of start the conversation there. Like, am I accurate? Am I way off base? Or
no, you are 100% accurate. From the very get-go, the design philosophy was, if you don't have anyone in your life that plays D&D, if you've never heard of D&D, if you've never watched a live play, but you somehow ended up with this box set, like, you could start playing D&D. And like, that was part of some of the feedback over the past 8 years that we've gotten from that first starter set was, oh my gosh, Phandelver is amazing. I love this adventure, but you really need someone that kind of knows what they're doing to run it. It's not the best experience for brand new folks. And so for this version, we really wanted to bring it back to just start playing, go small, be simple. Like, you don't need to create a character right now. Here's a really cool character for you. We can get into character creation with the next set. Like, just hop in and start playing. And so really, making the adventure site small, they made the character sheets a little bit more narrative driven, just to give that extra helping hand. And then on top of all of that, we also created a bunch of resources that are on the website. You can go to playdnd.com. That is a whole new player resource hub that will walk you through the character sheet. It will walk you through a stat block and how to read it. We have a video showing like the very first encounter in this box set. So if you really have no idea, it's like, we'll just watch the one encounter and maybe you'll start to understand how the flow works. So we really put a lot of effort into making it really like an easy, simple, approachable first step.
Yeah, and that I actually had gotten into a little bit of a discussion, and totally positive discussion, which is weird to say about Twitter, but a positive discussion with someone about like, what do complicated systems look like in their introductory phase of like, hey, come play this. And the idea that like we're so capable of having technology enhance our experience of like, no, like, scan this QR code. It will literally take you to not potentially a video of how to play, or even a video of someone playing, because I feel like examples of play go a lot farther now than they ever did before. Even if it's written like, walking through, player A says, I want to do this. The DM says, then I need you to do this. Player A succeeds or fails, and just even those small bits of example play, because I don't think I've ever seen D&D included, and this is not a knock on literally anyone. I don't know how you really structure rules to be presented in a way that adapts for all people, because there could be a person that reads this rule book, and I'm pointing to it like I forget I'm on a podcast sometimes. Everyone, you can see that I'm pointing, but the idea that one person could read it and it just perfectly click, and the next person could read it and be as lost as they possibly could be.
Exactly. Or you see, a 32-page rule book and you're like, I don't want to read that. I just straight up don't want to read that. Give me a video. Give me a little blurb that says how to do it.
Yeah. The fact that it's literally page 1, what do you want to say? Column 1. There's a QR code that's like, hey, do you want to hear this person tell you about it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really good design approach just in general, like I said, because who doesn't have their phone probably already in their hand, or at least right next to them, that you just scan that and watch the video. I think that like some of the ways that describing the Dungeon Master, I think is gone in a really positive direction, because I feel like previously things have been presented more in the sense that like Dungeon Master knows rules and stuff, players do stuff.
Right.
And so there hasn't been as well of a description of like, okay, that's nice, but what is a Dungeon Master? And so I think so I guess kind of the question is like, what was the idea behind better presenting like who the Dungeon Master is and what they can be?
To me, the Dungeon Master is the most important player at the table, because they run so many things, but really just recognizing, I think, that they are part of the party. I think like it's not Dungeon Master versus players. It's not world versus players. It's all about everyone creating a story together.
Yeah, and I think the sentence, there were several sentences that stuck out. So yeah, literally, if you're listening, reading that, I think really everyone listening, at least go read this bit is kind of what I'm getting to, is that the idea, there was something that said that the dungeon master is the lead storyteller.
Yes.
And entitling it in that way is really telling of the idea that, okay, but that implies and is true then that everyone is a storyteller. The dungeon master just so happens to be the lead storyteller.
Yeah, they're just directing traffic sometimes.
Yeah.
But, ensuring that everyone gets a space at the table, everyone gets an opportunity to be collaborative in the story that you're all telling together too.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting thing that my professional world side brings into this. It's not necessarily that everyone's choices are chosen, but it's that everyone's voice has been heard.
Yeah.
It applies to the dungeon master, and it applies to a lot of aspects of life. The idea that, like, everyone needs to feel like what they said had been genuinely heard, but you can't choose all the choices. Like, one of my go-to styles at being at a convention is as a note card. So everyone at the table, I say, hey, go ahead, write, because I don't know these people. So go ahead, write 3 things down that you'd like to see in this session. I can promise that I'll get one of them in, but I cannot promise that I'll do any more than that, just because oftentimes they conflict with each other, or they conflict with, because one person could easily write down, I want to see all of us succeed. I want to see us all die on the same note card. And it's like, obviously I can't really do, I mean, maybe I could try and do both of those.
Mass resurrections.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's tough. So the idea that, again, but everyone feels heard now because they they wrote down what they want to see, and then they start to see some of those things in play. So the other thing I think about is tying it back into, this one will be in my brain, so I'm just going to say it. We're stream of consciousness. I love the art. I love the art a lot.
Yes.
Some serious homage to the 80s cartoon, and I love it. And then it also makes me think, and I will say these things, and you do not need to say or react to these statements in any way, shape, or form. I'm doing it definitely for the listener. But the idea that these things are here and they've shown up in other places, the likelihood that they will show up again seems high. The fact that I've pre-ordered the action figures online, I'm just excited to potentially see more from these characters going down the line. It's been from 5th edition jump. Things have been hidden in books that don't show up for years. So the likelihood that this is also true seems like it could happen. But again, I'm just talking to myself. I'm not even talking to you when I say those things.
I will say I also hope to see these characters show up in other places. I can't really say if they will or they won't, but I do love that they serve an aspirational purpose in this set. Like, you see these adventures. I could be that wizard. I could be that fighter. And I think, it definitely, and also just like the Easter egg for all of us that watched the cartoon way back in the day. It is just very fun. And I'm really glad that we got to incorporate this artwork into the starter set.
Yeah.
Especially, I think a lot of parents are starting to play with their kids too. So having that, just like, when I was your age, I watched these on Saturday morning.
Yep. Yeah. And these were a little bit before my time, but I certainly watched them when I was younger. And then I've had my kids start watching them a little bit as well, because I had bought that DVD set. Oh geez, we don't have to talk about how long ago I bought the DVD set, but I did. And then so we've been watching those a bit. But I think, again, that speaks a lot to the ideas behind that starter set. You're giving these touch points to people that watch these how many decades ago, and then, like you said, you're having them be this introductory piece, or again, the person that knows nothing at all, and they're like, I don't understand what these characters are all about, and then come to find out
they look cool.
Yeah, they're like, oh, what? There's a whole cartoon that I can watch. And so those kind of things as well. So the other thing I think of is when this gets built, especially the starter set. Like, I kind of think of, like, are there designs behind, like, these lead into campaigns? Or is it more of like, this is your first step and I hope that you take steps beyond it? Like, I guess part of that is, like, kind of how does that come into play, like, when it's being built?
It's mostly like, we hope you like this nice little taste of D&D. Like, please come and play more. But the fun thing about this starter set and the location, if you wanted to tie it into other campaigns, like this island is right off of the Sword Coast. So if then once you were done on Stormwreck Island, you could make your way to the Storm Coast and play through Lost Mine of Phandelver, or even the Essentials kit is all based around the Sword Coast as well. So if, your dungeon master could then create a travel to the mainland story, or, if you were a player, like then switch places with the DM. You DM the next adventure and have the DM be a player, but you can kind of tie it all together in that way just from location, but they're all standalone.
Yeah. And then looking a little bit backwards, because we had Shelley and Cade on to talk about some of the educational materials.
Yes.
And then those in so many ways are a really interesting session 0, or almost like a session 0.5 to lead into the starter set itself. And those are built in such a really interesting, almost DM-less way that like someone that clearly wants to be the DM probably is going to stand out in that process. And those are, correct me if I'm wrong, but the educational materials are just freely available.
They are freely available right at our new player resource hub, playdnd.com. There is a educator resource, and there will be the links to all of that.
Yeah, and I don't want that to deter anyone listening, because on verbal, it could be a deterrent to be like, educational resources, I don't want that. But I do think it is a really beneficial tool. Like if you are buying this starter set for any reason, to go quickly check those out, because like I said, especially if it's younger players or players that are in no way familiar with really role-playing games at that point, not just necessarily D&D, but like haven't really dipped those toes, because kind of like you're mentioning your origin story, there's a big difference between being really good and playing Catan all the time to now playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Those aren't. There are some helpful skills, but there's only so many stories I can tell myself about why I keep rolling, getting so many sheep. but the idea that this does really well again to showcase what it is like prior to play and leading into this. And then, from there, man, I'm trying to think of all the ones that you could pop into post this. I mean, Storm King's Thunder, if you go north, Waterdeep, if you want to go a little bit farther south.
Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I was like,
right around there.
Yeah, I was like, Descendant into Avernus is probably not the best for everyone to jump in right out the gate. It's there, but I don't know that it's always the one I suggest. Like, you just did the starter set. Descendant into Avernus may not be the way to go, but it's a great adventure. But
I think from the starter set, if you're coming from a place of not a whole lot of experience with role-playing games or D&D, from the starter set, going to the Essentials kit is probably your next best step. Mostly because I feel like you then might be ready to start creating your own characters. And, that set includes all the character creation rules. And you get a little bit higher level of gameplay. Like you get to go all the way to level 5 in that set. So you get those really sweet 3rd level spells, which we all know and love.
Yeah, and I think, okay, Educator Kit, Educator Kit, Stormwreck Isle, Essential Kit, Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Ooh. Okay, that is a very fun adventure.
There's our path. There you go. Someone go.
I would say pick up the player's handbook in that loop as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I also think you're already, depending on the affinity that your players have, because mine have just skyrocketed into loving having a ship and being on a ship, with the idea that like you could also adapt Ghosts of Saltmarsh into this. Because that's what definitely. I didn't. I put Ghosts of Saltmarsh on the Sword Coast just because that's what my players are more familiar with. So I adapted it that direction. So that's where they've been. And my current campaign is Ghosts of Saltmarsh.
Nice. I think you made a really excellent point earlier when you said, take what works for you and your table and just plop that stuff into what you're doing. Yes, definitely. It's like, take a look at our other shorter adventures. Like I really love the Tales from the Yawning Portal book that has, it's also an adventure anthology. It actually has some really good introductory adventures in there. The Sunless Citadel, which is the first one, is just top notch for a new player, new dungeon master adventure. So I absolutely highly recommend that one. And it has one of my favorite NPCs ever.
Okay, who's that?
Meepo.
Yep. Okay, I assumed. That's really where I cut my teeth on being a dungeon master. Is those early ones, the Sunless Citadel, the Forge of Fury, like around there.
Yeah.
I will throw a word of caution to anyone on that conversion from 3 to 5. Dragons got terrifying.
Yes.
So just be mindful.
They are movers and shakers across the multiverse. That's
Yes.
very, very true.
Yeah, so Dungeon Master, if you play either of those, the Sunless Citadel or Forge of Fury, be mindful that those dragons are very, very scary. So just throw that out there. I lost myself now. All I can think about is that my early 3.5 days.
Threw you off with Meepo. All of those memories come flooding back.
Oh my gosh. And then everyone wanting to get that white dragon and keep it, and then someone inevitably dying because that doesn't work that well.
Yeah, and that's another fun thing about playing D&D. It's like, okay, we both clearly played through these adventures, but since we're at different tables, different experiences. But I love being able to talk to other folks that have played through the same adventure as I did, and be like, did you make friends with Meepo? Did you accidentally attack Meepo? Did you notify the others? Like, how did that work for you guys? What was that like? What was different between your experience and mine? But it's still like I totally shared. It can still be a shared thing. Like we went through many of the same steps together. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that was another one that I was going to bring up, and it's perfect. It's like we planned it. Perfect segue. The kobolds that are in this adventure, I think, hold a really special place, and I feel like there are new meepos within this just because, really, they held such a dark place for a long time. Kobolds, like, they're your entry level monster, and you kill just swaths of them, and early and later. But the idea that they've been drawn to this draconic power from this island, but then also that super simple concept of, they like dragons. There are good dragons. There should be good kobolds. And it was just like, well, that's really simple. And I don't know why I wouldn't have thought of that up until now.
Not everything has to be inherently evil.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be mean.
Yeah. It was just this like retroactive moment of just like, oh no, that always just made sense. There was no point at which that wouldn't have made sense to me. It's just something that I just hadn't thought of.
Your friendly neighborhood kobold.
Yeah. And just, the idea of then at that point, you just, adapt them to every make and model of dragon, especially, metallic and chromatic. But then what does a gem kobold look like?
Ooh.
And
like
one that is long term in service to a gem dragon, or then when you dip into more psionic dragons and the lunar dragon. I mean, so like every moniker of dragon then can have a version that is the kobold.
Totally.
And there you go. So so do you have a favorite NPC from this?
I think it has to be Runara, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, without spoilers, just she's awesome.
Yep, she is. That was my first thing when I very first read it. I was like, oh, okay. I wonder when they'll figure that out. That's nice.
Yeah. It's good fun little twist.
Yeah, and I also like that in a lot of ways. It's a lot of again, looking at the real world, like there's a lot of places and spaces that we as humans have chosen to live that aren't always conducive to us being there. I think of places that have hurricanes. I think of when my house shakes here in California. I think of, or the wildfires or, and just like the way that concept functions, like why is there a town on this island at all? Like, why would anyone do that? Like, it's literally like there is a storied history of how this brings dragons to this isle.
There's a lot of dragon battles here. Why would you want to be here? Like, shouldn't you avoid this area at all costs?
But then you think, like, I mean, there's this prestige to it. There's this, this ownership of the place. And then there's also, to some element, like the idea that it is, in fact, a natural disaster. And that's just what happens. And you happen to live here. And your whole lineage has always lived here, and we always will. And we're stronger than these things that happen to us. Oh, that's right. So one of the other things that I've noted from all of the starter sets, and this one is no different, but I think this one does it very well, and you had alluded to it, that the character sheets take on a more narrative bent than potentially before. Can you kind of speak to like that narrative approach for those?
I mean, it's really just for folks that aren't familiar with a character sheet, you might just like look at it and be like, what are these numbers? What do I do with them? I don't understand how to use this. So for the updated character sheets, it's like, hey, you have a mace. You can do this melee damage. And hey, when it's your turn, like we are going to tell you literally like roll a d20 and add this modifier. If you get above a certain AC, like, hey, then you get to roll the hit. And we're just going to lay out in plain language like what that actually means. Like roll another d20, add this modifier. Boom, like you've just made an attack. So rather than just having numbers on a page that you need to figure out yourself, it's like we're gonna just add a little extra language around it so you understand actually what that means and what you're supposed to do. So coming from just like a brand new approach, just like, okay, like I understand this now. It's telling me to roll a d20 and add a modifier.
Yeah. Well, I also think of like even, and this has been there longer, but even on the attributes side, not putting STR, typing out strength, not putting con, putting constitution, even those simple things. But like you said, the attacks, because I wouldn't have thought of it. I started in second edition. I was looking at tables and charts and all those things to kick it off. So by the time I'm looking at something that says mace +4, 1d8 +4, let's say that's my thing. I get it. I don't have to question what that means. I understand. And then I move on. But the idea that like, yeah, no, that could be pretty daunting, because typically then it's also like, oh, but also here's your hand axe. Also, here's your unarmed.
Right.
Also, you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, this literally says mace. In melee, against a target within 5 feet of you, you can attack with your mace. Roll 1d20 +4 to see if you hit. If you do, the target takes 1d6 +2 bludgeoning damage. Ta-da!
It's beautiful. It just it's taking the guesswork out of it. So you don't, have to go and search through a 300-page rule book or even our 30-page rule book for this set. It's just trying to ease folks into it. And really, I think a lot of going into the design of this, it was trying to really understand like what is potentially like gatekeeping language. Like you mentioned it yourself, like instead of just having STR, like writing out strength, because if you aren't familiar with our, some of our language usage, how are you supposed to know what STR is unless we spell it out for you for the first time?
Yeah, that one, I always think about like which ones a person can probably figure out. Strength, I feel like a person's probably going to figure out. Con, maybe, but like even as a base word, like constitution, like that's not really how a person outside of TTRPGs is going to describe their ability to take damage or their ability to drink poison on accident, or and I think of like Wiz and Int, like they're all a little bit tougher when you reduce them down to their abbreviations. And I think the other thing that was changed here that I think works really well, because again, the whole concept is this is introduction into 5th edition at this point in time, is that there weren't the ideals, bonds, flaws, but instead it's like, no, this is your background and this is your personal goal. So yeah, can you speak to potentially some of that change to make it more, I mean, in a lot of ways, I assume it's just to focus that, so that instead of having these 4 that you're keeping, it's just your personal goal. What are you trying to do?
Right. And I think that helps tie the adventurers, the players, to the adventure more. Like they want to seek out that NPC that they may need to talk to. It really just helps connect them more into the adventure, and I think get them into that role-playing mindset. Yeah, especially with just giving them the background information as well. Just really like, who is this player? What do you want to do? Like, more of the whys behind it, to really get them in the mindset of being like, I am no longer Natalie. I am Brunar, the bold dwarf warrior. Yeah. With a big old mace that I'm going to smash zombies with.
Perfect. We apparently will play the same character. And it's gonna be great. The other thing I think of is like, tying it more back into that DM side of things. Any pre-gen character that gets used now has an adventure hook. any pre-gen character that doesn't get used still has an adventure hook that you can use because it's written down on the paper that no one's looking at other than you. So yeah, it's just, again, it's hard, and I am definitely going to say that this is more of a preach than a practice, but it's always best to really read through all the material of something like this before starting. I know that's not an easy sell, and I know that's not really what I do all the time. When I do, I'm just like, oh, well, yeah, this all does make more sense when I read it in totality. It's almost like that's how they designed it.
Yes, I'm hoping that this one, we're trying to break it down to make like each little adventure site, each little encounter area smaller, just to make it easier for that new DM prep. Like, you don't need to read a whole lot. Just read up to this section, understand how the NPCs and the environment work together here, and really like, what is the objective of this area?
Yeah, the individual areas do a really good job. And so it's broken into chapters for the adventure itself. And then, the individual chapters really do kind of say like, okay, ending this chapter. And then, the idea would be like, if you do start the next chapter, because even if you don't, I think of like, now it feels like forever ago, but it's not that long ago. But the Adventure Zone was going through the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and just based on the actions that the characters had chosen, just went a completely different direction. Didn't really finish what that adventure. Not that it matters, because obviously they had a great game, and it was, and this amazingly successful podcast and everything behind it. But like the idea that like the story they decided to tell veered off basically from like 3/4 of the way through that adventure, and then never looked back at whatever that other quarter may or may not have been. So the idea that each of these could then turn into that jumping off point of do you do chapters 1, 2, and then go to the essentials kit and don't do 3 and 4. I mean, it all it all depends on your party and
what works for your table. Yeah,
perfect. So we're getting close to our time. So one of the things we do is we give out homework. I don't know that it applies as much to this one of like things a person could do or read or experience. I would just then suggest that like go to playdnd.com and see what's there. Because the other thing is, and I know this is another hard sell, if you read the whole thing, you also find out what you don't like. And that's just as beneficial.
Yes, absolutely. I think like the main takeaway from this set, and I think just D&D in general, like use what works for you, use what works for your table, what is the most fun for you and your party, and leave out the rest. Like what? Like this is your game. It's adaptable to whatever you want your play style to be. Just use what you like and forget about the rest.
Perfect. So the other question I have is, where can people go to follow you, see what you're doing, all of those things, if you want to send them anywhere, of course.
I do not maintain a very strong social media presence.
That is fine. I'm not great at it either.
Yeah, social media is a whole nother beast. So unless, folks just want to see cute pictures of my basset.
Oh, I do. I 100% do. I used to.
Well, then I will send you my Instagram.
Perfect. Because I used to have one. I haven't talked about this before either. Well, I don't know why. This one is a lot of things I probably haven't talked about. So I used to have a basset hound, and his name was Thor. He was purebred, papered, huge lineage of all the bassets that had come before him. But the person who had bred him didn't want him because he was too big. He literally couldn't show because he was so far outside of the class category for basset hounds. So How
big was he?
So I never put extra weight on him because I didn't want to deal with hip dysplasia, back problems, and all of those things that come naturally, especially with an overweight basset hound. So lean, 80 pounds.
80 pounds. That's a big baby.
He was a monster, deceptively so, because his legs are so short, but he was big enough that none of the kitchen counters were safe. He would literally, pop up, and then you have that huge snout. He would grab things off calmly and cautiously set them on the ground, and he'd eat all of them. Never make a mess. He would just calmly go steal your food, set it down, and eat everything. But yeah, he was 80 pounds.
That is amazing. My pup is the opposite. I think he might have been the runt of the litter. He's only 45.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He was, again, so big that the guy was like, I mean, I can't show him, I can't do anything. And, and the idea, like, it's callous at some point in the story, but the idea that like that person then wouldn't want to breed him either because he's too big. He's going to make another basset hound that's too big. So then, someone was like, oh yeah, we have this basset hound puppy. He was 8 months, and then he comes around, and I'm like, "That's a full-grown dog. That's a whole dog standing in front of me."
Big boy.
Yeah, I do not know where this puppy is, but it's not that dog. And so, I had him for quite a few years. So,
nice. Oh,
there we
that's
go.
Awesome.
Perfect. On that note, I had an absolutely wonderful time talking about this, sharing a bunch of stuff that I apparently had never shared before. And
thank you so much for having me. This has been great. Course.
And then, we'll have to figure out another time for another thing and have you come back on.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
We just want to thank Natalie again for coming on, spending some time, giving some insights, and shedding some light on that latest starter set. And of course, if you have played the starter set, or if you just want to tell us which one you think is the best introduction for you into D&D 5th edition, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, if you see fit, you can leave us an iTunes review, an Apple Podcast review, Spotify. If your friend gives you the files and you just want to give them a thumbs up because of how much you like us, go ahead and do that. It always helps us. And of course, you can try and find us on social media. Who knows what that means anymore? And on Twitter, we are still at DMS_block. And just try and find us, Dungeon Master Block. We'll be there. And of course, as always, we are a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other amazing shows like Detentions and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, and more. And as always, thank you for spending some time and listening to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. I'm DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on Dungeon Mastering.
Goodbye.